welcome back to my channel. So now that we have read the introduction of Soiled Doves, we will be moving on to Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is Silk Stockings and Fancy Lingerie, and they have a nice little image here to go along with the chapter. This is Timothy Golden Collection of Missoula, Montana, a lady of easy virtue. Alright, here we go. The heyday of prostitution in America occurred during the turbulent years of the early West, when women were at a premium. It was an era of cowboys and indigenous people, gunslingers and fancy ladies. Elegant parlor houses and first-class brothels appeared in larger cities like San Francisco, Seattle, and Denver. Shabby cribs and lower-class brothels sprang up in cowtowns and mining communities that were spread throughout the frontier. It was a time of adventure and danger, and a period in history when lonely men often called the Red District their second home. Quote, "The mere mention of a bonnet on the streets of Denver in 1859 brought gonnets bolting to their doors, and a youth in another Colorado mining camp paid $20 in gold dust for the initial pancake made by the region's first unmarried woman," end quote. Thousands of unattached females flocked to the womanless society in order to gain wealth and personal freedom. Most were inexperienced, illiterate, and totally unprepared for the ways of the rugged West. The majority of these women were forced out of necessity to accept the only employment available, prostitution. As the members of this profession grew, a strict hierarchy was soon established. For the innocent, this was often a rude awakening, as they were at the bottom and caught in a situation from which there were few ways to escape. At the top of the system were the courtesans or mistresses, followed by lavish parlor houses and fancy brothels. The courtesan was usually a woman of beauty, intelligence, and sophistication. She knew what she wanted and had the wit and charm to attain her goal. While the European ladies became the mistresses of royalty, the American women formed romantic attachments with gentlemen of power and great wealth. They were willing to provide a personal service in exchange for monetary gain and a successful career. The man's stature within the community forced society to accept his mistress and often guaranteed her respectability. The parlor house was the next step in the hierarchy of the prostitution. These establishments were often referred to as, quote, boarding houses, end quote, also enjoyed a prime location. The decor was lavish, and their luxury often surpassed the other homes in the neighborhood. All parlor houses and high-class brothels had servants, a bouncer, and the professor. This gentleman supplied music for the ladies and guests during the evening. He played for a small wage, tips, and drinks. The professor usually traveled the circuit, visiting each house for a few weeks. Some were talented, others were not, but it wasn't the music the customer came to hear. He had other things on his mind. The madame in these establishments was always sophisticated and discreet, and her girls were referred to as boarders. There were about 20 elegantly clad, experienced prostitutes working in each house. The girls ranged from 18 to 30 years of age. These ladies purchased their own clothing and wore the latest fashions in the evening wear, afternoon costumes, and expensive lingerie, which was considered to be the business expense. Quote, "In San Francisco, as elsewhere, the parlor house resident had to be the only beautiful but accomplished. A visit to a perfectly managed parlor house was much like a visit to a private home, and the prostitute resembled in decorum and dress the daughters of the house. Some writers wittily argued that the only difference, in fact, was that the prostitute was more attractive, more intelligent, and more accomplished than the young society lady," end quote. In order to ensue a profitable business, the madame had to attract quality customers through discreet advertising. One of the popular methods was to have her ladies dress in their finest and stroll leisurely along the promenade or ride in an open carriage through the park. On these excursions, a few of the women would carry their pet poodles. These soft, cuddly little dogs were a favorite of the parlor ladies, so no decent woman dared to own one. Okay. Just a fun little fact, I guess. On occasion, the madame would send special engraved invitations to her opening soirees. These costly affairs allowed prospective customers the opportunity to meet her ladies. The guests were often offered fine food, champagne, and an evening of pleasure. The madame made up her losses by selling bottles of wine at 500 times their actual cost. The most effective advertising, however, was a directory that could be found in the elite saloons, restaurants, and hotels throughout the city. The first one appeared in New Orleans, and it was called The Blue Book, A Gentleman's Guide to New Orleans. The book was very popular, but unfortunately not all the men were gentlemen. These books contained names, addresses, and description of the parlor houses or brothels, and the ladies who worked in them. The French and American women were at the top, with the French ladies noted for their experience in the bon Dieu. Many elite parlor houses also requested a letter of recommendation or business card from their customers before allowing them to enter the house. The ladies were encouraged to change their clothing, makeup, and perfume to the madame's accounts. The credit of the madame was always excellent. Unfortunately, of the girls was worthless. The merchants usually added an extra 20% to the already high bills, and the ladies were constantly in debt to the madame. There was little, if any, money left for their future. These women lived only for the moment. During their spare time, the parlor house ladies did fancy needlework, read books, or spent hours in the garden. They were served nourishing meals several times a day. Since their work was strenuous, the ladies ate steaks and roast and drank large amounts of milk. It was a life of comfort and ease for that era. In the evening, however, the parlor house's prostitutes paid their dues when she had to cater to men's sexual needs. Once he entered her bedroom, he usually forgot his breeding and background. The woman was considered fair game and required to do as he wished. She could never hurry the man she was entertaining, no matter how humiliating or painful it became. She had to pretend she was enjoying her job. Needless to say, a great deal of money was spent on the fancy sheets and pillowcases, which were changed several times a night. Oh, that sounds awful. The parlor house clients were highly respected, prominent figures of the community and gentlemen of wealth. Upon arrival, the man was conducted to the parlor by the maid, and if he did not have a special woman in mind, the madame would select one for him. Following the introduction, they would converse a while before sitting down to a gourmet supper, accompanied by expensive wines. Later, when he was ready to go upstairs, the maid would discreetly collect the fees for the evening. There were no hints of commercialization. The madame took care of any problems and assured the girls protection from the vice raids. There could be no disturbances from rowdy guests, and the customers were guaranteed complete privacy. The madame always paid enough revenues and fees to the city, so the police left her house alone. She was also expected to make generous contributions to local charities and churches. In return, the ladies gave the madame half of their fee, which was about $25 or more if the man spent the night. They also paid for their room and board and personal beverages. The girls were allowed to keep their own tips. Since parlor house prostitutes were not welcome at social gatherings, there was little to spend on their money on. It was a restricted, lonely life that was only lived by the tinkle of the bell of the words, "Company ladies." The majority of the madames were prostitutes who were no longer attractive to men. They were experienced in the profession and ran the house with a firm hand. These women were also lonely and craved affection, but seldom had a lover who cared about them. The girls were their companions. A few of the madames liked Denver's Maddie Silks and Laura Evans, chose to be madames because it meant upward mobility and the chance to become wealthy without catering to the personal needs of a man. None of the madames competed with the girls for a customer. These women rarely produced innocent victims or hired girls from the white slave trade. The parlor house prostitute could not be an amateur. A lack of ventilation was characteristic of all parlor houses and brothels. The windows were seldom open, and the houses reeked of stale smoke, stale drinks, and stale perfume. The tall barred windows not only kept the fresh air out, they provided protection for the madame and her girls. The madame always had jewelry and money in her safe, and each lady had her own trunk filled with what valuables she possessed. Everything these women owned was kept in their one pathetic trunk. The barred windows also kept uninvited guests out. More than one man was known to climb over the rooftops to pay a visit to a fair lady, thus cheating the madame of her percentage. As the westward movement continued to grow, towns like Butte, Deadwood, and Wallen sprang to life. Tales of rich and gold and silver strike and instant millionaires made headlines around the world. As the shortage of females on the frontier grew and more pronounced, ruthless procedures began to recruit young European girls for shipment to America. In return, the girls were required to serve a term of years working for an employer. The employer, unfortunately, was usually a brothel owner. Although many of these women were already prostitutes, others were often innocent victims who came to America to find a better life. They were uneducated, unskilled, and most did not understand English. A few managed to find husbands. Some were indentured and domestics, but the majority were forced into prostitution. Since they had no choice, the women eventually learned to accept their fate. They blended into the womanless West and were affectionately known by names like Irish Mary, English Rose, and Dutcham. These multicultural soiled doves appeared throughout the frontier in both urban as well as the raw, untamed communities. They set up their businesses in canvas tents, flimsy shacks, and all available buildings. The women weren't elegant, but the men welcomed them with open arms. A touch of femininity had arrived, and the lonely males finally had a friendly place to hang their hats. As the West expanded, a few of the smaller structures were converted into brothels, which became the next step in the hierarchy of prostitution. All of the houses of prostitution, whether they were in an urban area or the frontier, existed to cater to men's needs. There was a word of difference, however, between an elite parlor house and a brothel, although both were often referred to as a house. Most brothels were situated in what was called the red light district or tenderloin. This was the designed area for the houses of sin, saloons, gambling establishments. The term red light is said to have originated in Dodge City, Kansas. Dodge City was a major stop for the railroad and a convenient place for the train crews to visit the ladies of negotiable virtue. When these men entered the brothels, as they often did, they would leave their red lanterns outside so they could be located in case of an emergency. The madame soon realized that the red light was an excellent way to advertise, and the custom spread. The red light in front of the place of prostitution eventually became a law, and every brothel and crib had to display the light during the night. Many cities also insisted that a red shade of curtain be hung in the windows of these establishments during the day. Establishments during the day. Pearl Star, daughter of petticoat bandit Belle Star, and a madame took the law seriously. She placed a garnished star-shaped sign outside of her Fort Smith, Arkansas brothel. The star was outlined in bright red, and it could be seen blocks away, blazing in its crimson welcome. The term tenderloin originated in the district of New York City, where vice and police corruption were common. The area became notorious for its nightlife, crime, and prostitution, and the name spread throughout the West. The high-class brothels were located in a red light district and were a step down from the elegant parlor houses. They were not as well furnished, and the madames were less discreet. The girls who worked in the brothels wore fancy, not elaborate clothing, and a considerable amount of makeup to conceal desperation that was part of their profession. Bruising. It's talking about bruising, scars, and things like that. These women ranged from 16 to 35 in age. Age, however, was not always an important factor. Many times an older and experienced prostitute would earn more than a beautiful young girl. In her autobiography, Madeleine, a 19th century prostitute, wrote, quote, "Most women who have been 10 years in the business are still under 30 and retain much of their youthful charm. But if they stay in the place where they are known, they become old-timers to the men and do not receive the consideration shown to the younger women," end quote. It was important for the experienced prostitutes to move from one location to another in order to appear youthful and maintain a successful career. Although they were not elegantly furnished, the brothel still offered warm hospitality. They had comfortable saloons where the customer would enjoy an alcoholic drink and conversation with the prostitute before he requested her sexual favors. When he was ready, the man would ask the girl if she wanted to take a walk. She always said yes, but it was doubtful that the lady ever felt any romance or passion. Sex was her business. The girls in a brothel worked for less than the parlor house ladies, and they had a faster turnover. These women earned about $10 for their services. The price, however, could go higher depending upon the skill of the lady. No matter how much the prostitute earned, the madame always took her customary percentage. She also sold beer and whiskey to the customers at inflated prices. It was a profitable business. Almost all brothels displayed a variety of signs and mottos. One that was frequently seen was, quote, "If at first you don't succeed, try again," end quote. In larger houses, a motto on the wall would often say, quote, "Lots of boarders, all the comforts of home," end quote. The most popular sign, however, was, quote, "Satisfaction guaranteed or money refunded," end quote. Unfortunately, the men seldom received a refund. He was usually presented with a wooden disc that was stamped, quote, "Good for one," end quote. A few of the madames would occasionally take their girls on what was referred to as a, quote, "summer vacation." They would set up large tents near or within a mining camp or town, and the ladies would go to work. The miners were delighted, and it increased business. It also provided the girls with a change of scenery. When they returned to their brothels in the city, it was often with renewed energy. Madames like these were well liked by the girls. Laurel Evans was one of the popular madames. She was a lady from the South who married at 17, had a daughter at 18, and deserted both her husband and daughter to become a prostitute. She worked in the houses of the West, where she was admired for her beauty, escapades, and a love life that few women enjoyed. Laura was one of the rare women who managed to save her money. In 1900, she opened a house in Salida, Colorado, and settled down to run a profitable business. Although Laura was a wild, boisterous woman who roared... Although Laura was a wild, boisterous woman who rolled her own cigarettes and spouted profanity, she was adored by her girls as well as her customers. Laura was known for her generosity, kindness, and loyalty to her employees. She ran a successful brothel until prostitution in Colorado became illegal. While many madames were fair and kind, a few were known to be cruel and vicious. These few often had complete control over their girls, who were usually so indebted to the madame that they couldn't leave. Although society seldom bothered to interfere in the red light districts, one madame finally went too far. The woman beat one of her girls so badly that the police were called to the scene. When the madame went to court, she was sentenced to jail for 80 days for inflicting, quote, cruel torture upon one of her miserable women, end quote. In comparison, Lou Harper, a German madame, operated a first-class brothel on Mary Q Street in Butte, Montana. Her girls were beautiful and in their early 20s. They enjoyed comfortable rooms, a good clinical and protection. Lou's relationships with her women were so close that they referred to her as, quote, mother. This was often the case in a brothel. The women were lonely and in need of love. A good madame became a surrogate mother. Ugh. When the Civil War ended, many of the newly emancipated black women entered the profession. Quote, thrust into a society that did not want them, left with no means of support, some black women turned to prostitution in the West, end quote. These women were used to slavery and merely traded one form of bondage for another. The more enterprising became madames who operated their own brothels. Others worked in integrated houses, and few remained on their own. The black women were welcomed into the, quote, sisterhood, and they blended easily into the rugged life of the early West. All things considered, the courtesan and parlor housewoman were better off than the average prostitute. A few managed to save enough money to open their own house or start a small business. Some were lucky enough to marry. For most, however, it was just the first step down a long road of despair. As for the madame, she either retired wealthy or remained in the business until the day she died. That is the end of chapter 1. That is the end of Silk Stockings and Fancy Lingerie. The next chapter is the notorious Lola Montez. It has an image of her. I'll show next video. Yeah. It's getting heavier, and I guess I wasn't anticipating that, although I should have. I definitely should have. So anyway, yeah, that was chapter 1 of Soiled Doves by Anne Seagraves. Please comment down below what you found interesting about this chapter, how it compares to the introduction, what do you think the next chapter could be about. Please like, do the comment, subscribe if you have not already, and hit the little bell notification. It really helps. Alright, I'll see you in chapter 2. Bye everyone!